We should have novel interactions with clients on the screen right now. And today, what am I picking? Here we go. I'm going to talk about paying a stipend to a client for each therapy session he attended. Very novel intervention. So let me stop screen sharing. I don't need this anymore. And I will tell you about my client. This was fairly early in my practice. I think I had been in practice for about maybe 10 years. And I received had a relative who had a friend. It was a cousin of mine. My cousin's friend owned a board and care facility for Vietnam vets, those who had been crippled by the war. Some of them were physically crippled and some of them were emotionally crippled. He had a string of residences on the west side of Los Angeles. According to local zoning laws, you could have a board and care facility for no more than 6 people in a residential neighborhood. So there were a whole bunch of converted houses that had been put to this purpose. And the client to be, who I was about to meet, lived in one of the houses that was down in Venice and within a couple blocks of the Venice beach. I got called because the man who was the owner of the facility was really quite a humanitarian. He was not only in what he was doing for the money, but he liked providing services to people who were down on their luck and in difficult circumstances. But this particular resident and this particular residence was making all kinds of practical problems for him. Uh, the man who was to become my client frequently was, quote, out of control, unquote. He had a second floor bedroom in this place, and he would lean out of the bedroom window at 2, 3 in the morning, and he would start screaming at the top of his lungs, or he would take his guitar and he would start playing and singing very loudly. He was bothering the neighbors all the time, and on occasion, the police were summoned. And when the police were summoned, he would get extremely belligerent. He would try and get into fistfights with the cops who were coming to calm him down. And on several occasions, he was actually taken down to the police headquarters for in Santa Monica. No, it was in Venice. It was the Venice police station for resisting arrest. And the poor owner of the property had to get up out of bed in the wee hours of the morning and go talk them into releasing him or bail him out if there were charges to be pressed against him. And he was constantly being disrupted by the man's behavior. When the man was out in the evening by himself, same thing would happen. He would sometimes take himself for a walk along the boardwalk in Venice, or he'd take himself for a walk somewhere else where there were people around. And if anybody approached him, he could become quite hateful and start screaming and threatening to assault the person who was bothering him. And it didn't matter if it was a policeman who came up to him, he would do the same damn thing and get himself into terrible trouble. So, it occurred to the owner of the facility that it might be helpful if the man went into psychotherapy. He had been seeing a VA psychiatrist intermittently, but they had simply given him medication. And he was probably not very good at maintaining any regular regimen of taking the medication, or the medication. It was in the early days of having psychoactive medication. The medications might have been useless for him. Who can say? I just know that he was in great trouble and out of control frequently at the time the referral was made to me. So I agreed to see him, like I do everyone, like an idiot. And then he came, and I treated him as I would anyone else in a certain regard. I don't like having secrets from the people I'm about to work with. So I told him that a great deal of information had been given to me by the board and care operator where he had his residence. And the board and care operator had said that he lost control frequently. And I described some of the episodes of his becoming belligerent that the board and care operator had described to me. And I asked my new client to be, was I hearing an accurate account of his behavior? And he nodded yes. And I said, well, I'm willing to work with you, but you and I could have a problem. I don't want to trigger you and have to go through what I'm hearing described. I don't want you to start screaming at me or threatening to assault me or actually assaulting me. I I'm a physical coward. I got beaten very often by gangs when I was a kid, and the whole smell of the possibility that somebody's going to come after me and try and beat me just fills me with terror. And I'd like to be able to just talk to you without being frightened that you're going to turn into a maniacal assaulter in my presence and make me the object of your behavior. That's going to constrain me. And if there's one thing I need the freedom to just share with you what I'm thinking about and what ideas occur to me. And I don't know you at all. I have no idea what things might trigger you or upset you or feel raw to you or feel off base to you. And I don't want to suddenly find myself being screamed at, spit upon, and socked. And so I need an agreement from you. I need an agreement that I'm not saying I'm not going to trouble you or piss you off or upset you inadvertently. I don't ever intend to, but I can't promise I'm going to be perfect. And I need you to protect me from you. Would you make a pact with me that you're not going to go out of control here and that we'll have a conversation about what's wrong and try to resolve it between the two of us and not start screaming at each other? So he agreed to do that. And to my surprise or delight, I wound up seeing him for about 10 months, 4 times a week. And I'll tell you why he left and what that was about. But he did get angry at me on 3 different occasions in that 10 months. And the worst he ever did was he picked up a box of Kleenex off my coffee table and he threw it in my direction. He didn't even hit me with the box of Kleenex. It was obviously an explosive outburst of just being miserable and wanting to throw something. But he was careful. He didn't throw anything that could be hurtful or do any damage anywhere. So I honored him for that. Uh, he told me about his service career because I was curious. I knew he was carrying a service connected disability. What was the problem? And he said he had registered for the war as a conscientious objector. It was possible during the Vietnam War not to avoid the draft, but when you register for the draft, if you stipulated you were a conscientious objector, you would not be put in a combat position where you would be called upon to kill other people. You could and would be drafted if your number came up, but you would be assigned to duties that did not involve. They might necessarily involve your being killed, but they would not involve your being called upon to kill anybody. So he didn't flee to Canada or become a draft dodger or anything. He registered as he should have. He stipulated he was a conscientious objector and he was drafted. Well, he was assigned to the medical corps. He was going to help save lives, and that felt worthwhile to him. He was not unhappy that he was going to go overseas and maybe come under fire and be in trouble. It felt holy in some ways that he would be a lifesaver if he could possibly be a lifesaver. And he was taught all kinds of first aid interventions and all kinds of emergency care he could give to people, even if he didn't have the resources readily available, how to make tourniquets out of ropes and sticks and all kinds of things he was learning. He did not know at the time what his final assignment would be, and it was hard for him to take. He was not assigned to the support of U.S. troops. What he was assigned to is that frequently strikes would be called in to places where U.S. troops were under attack, and helpless civilians would be caught in the crossfire. And one of the weapons we used over and over again. If there was an enclave of Vietnam soldiers in a Vietnamese village and they had some U.S. troops pinned down, a helicopter would swoop over and napalm the whole damn village, just burn the village to the ground and burn the people in it. And, didn't differentiate between civilians caught in this unfortunate circumstance and who might have been the combatants on the other side. So he was assigned to harvest the civilians who had been napalmed after a napalm attack. And he was to arrange for the removal of bodies. And if people were suffering various degrees of burns, he would treat the burns, or he would call in helicopters to pick them up and ferry them to hospitals in the rear areas where they could receive some care from the US military and some apologies for what had happened to them. And it ground on him. He saw children, he was dealing with children, children's burned corpses, children screaming in pain and running around in circles because they had been on fire and they had third-degree burns over most of their body. His life was a nightmare. 2 or 3 times a week, he would be sent on harvest of burned people. And he eventually snapped. He just broke down and he was crying and crying and crying. And he couldn't stop crying. He refused to get on the helicopter to go on a mission. And they evacuated him to a base hospital and they had a review. He was court martialed and he was mustered out of the Corps with a dishonorable discharge for and given a psychiatric diagnosis for the reasons for his discharge. Fortunately, as the war started to wound down, the attitude of the government softened about the casualties it had been creating. And even though he had a bad conduct discharge, he was allowed to access VA benefits for the year and a half of service he had managed to provide, and they didn't deprive him of benefits. He did get a pension, and he got access to the VA health system. So that's what I heard, and our time was up after the first session. And I asked him if he wanted to come back and were we going to work together? And he said he had found it useful to revisit what he had lived through and to talk to me about it. And he'd like to come back regularly, at least for a while, and try on seeing if I could be of any help and give him any kind of relief from the darkness and the hurt that was inside of him. So I said, I have to figure out what to pay you. The VA is not going to pay me anything for seeing you. You have to see VA docs for that. And they don't seem to be helping you. So we're going to have to figure out a fee. And I said, how much do you get in a pension? And he told me. He said, what's deducted from that pension payment for the board and care facility you're in? He gave me that number. I said, so you have X number of dollars left over. Are your meals provided? No, we have to buy a meal ticket at the place in order to get meals. What do you pay for meals? They're X number of dollars a week. Or I can purchase them on a daily basis. I can purchase the meal tickets, and sometimes I do that. And I said, but if you were to have 7 days a week of feeding yourself, it would cost you X. And he said, that's right. I said, yeah, do you ever go to a movie? Yeah, once in a while. Well, what's the movie cost? He told me. What do you ever buy some snacks and take them up to your room and just some junk food to nibble on when you might be hungry or don't feel like going down to the dining room? Yeah, I do that. What do you spend on food each week? I tried to go through a budget. Where does he spend money? You buy cigarettes. I think your fingers are brown. It looks like you're a smoker. I smoke a pack and a half a day. All right, what's that costing you to feed your habit of a pack and a half of cigarettes each day? And I kept going through various things down to razor blades. How often does he shave? How often does he need to buy razor blades? Does he use deodorant? On and on. What's that cost him? I finally arrived all the things I could think about to ask. And I said, goodness, you live very close to the line. I don't think you can afford to pay me very much. It seems like you have a little bit of discretionary money. Suppose we set the fee at $12.50 every visit, and that's what I'll expect you to pay me. How would you like to pay? Would you like to pay each time you come? Do you have any credit cards? You want to charge it on a credit card? Or should I send you a bill, give you a bill at the end of the month, mail you a bill at the end of the month? So he said he wanted to be billed. And I said, okay, I'll give you a bill at the end of the month. I saw him three more times that month because he'd come in early in the month. I handed him a bill on the last visit, which included that visit. I said, you've been here four times, so for $50. You can bring it. Oh, the bill is due sometimes next month. I give you a month's leeway, but I expect you to pay it before the end of the coming month. And you can pay it by mailing me a check, putting a check in my mailbox, just bringing it to a visit, doesn't matter. Any way you want to write me a check is fine. So next month went by. There were 5 Thursdays that month, so I saw him 5 times. And on the fifth Thursday, I said to him, well, something seems to have slipped. You didn't pay me for last month, and now you have 5 visits for this month. So here's a bill for $125, 50 for last month, and 75 for this month. All right, no, it wasn't seven. What was it? It was 62.50 for that month. That's what you owed me for that month. So this will be due by the end of the coming month. Third month went by. He didn't pay me anything. And I said, well, something is happening here. You said it seemed like you could afford to give me $12.50 and it wouldn't really interfere with you being able to live your life. And so far, there hasn't been any payment. And we're at the end of the third month. Do you have your checkbook with you? He said, no. I said, all right, so we're going to start into the fourth month and you're not going to pay me, or you haven't paid me. Maybe you're not going to pay me. I don't know. I have to treat this as some kind of communication between you and me. You're telling me that you're not going to pay me. So, first thing that occurs to me about why you're not going to pay me, I'm not going to go by default to you telling me to go fuck myself, that my services are worthless and they aren't worth a penny and you have no intention of giving me anything for them. Based on the flow between the two of us, I don't think that's what you're trying to say to me. This is not some kind of angry fuck you rebellion you're doing to me. You know what I think? Let's explore this. I think it felt like it might be useful for you to come. And I came up with a number, $12.50, and you didn't protest. You didn't tell me, I'm not sure I can pay you that much. And we didn't take a closer look at all your expenses. Maybe that's what the problem is. You agreed to do something because you wanted to continue doing it that you really can't afford to pay for. And he kind of looked down at the floor. And I said, well, let's do the budget number again. I don't know if there's anything urgent for you to talk to me about again today. Let's talk about what it actually costs you. And I'm going to try and do a memory trip with you day by day. Let's go back over this week. What did you have to write checks for or reach into your pocket to spend money for? And then I found out that what I had speculated about was true. He was actually on occasion, before even paying me, skipping some days of eating, just getting a little bit of junk food out of his own pocket because he had run out of money that week and he couldn't afford to purchase the meals that were he was going to consume each week. So he was going hungry occasionally, and he was sometimes picking up cigarette butts if they hadn't been fully smoked, and he was smoking cigarette butts because he had run out of money to purchase cigarettes. And I said, oh no, this is awful. Nobody should live this way. You've turned into a scavenger. Uh, Please, you deserve better than that. I'll tell you what, let's change the basis of our understanding. All this debt that you've accumulated up until now, is now forgiven. You don't owe me anything. Starting with today's session, I'm going to give you $12.50. You're not going to give me anything. I'm going to give you the money. You seem to me to be a person of great moral propriety and cares a lot about life and about human beings. And you deserve to have a little bit more flexibility and a little bit more security. So I'm happy to provide that for you, to acknowledge that you're a worthwhile person and should be taken care of and not treated so callously by policemen, by board and care operators, by VA doctors, and whoever don't see the nobility of your life. From my perspective, there's much about your life that's very noble, and I want to honor you. He said, let me get this straight. You're going to give me $12.50 if I show up here. I said, yes. He said, I can't take your money. He said, yes, you can. This money will make a great difference in your life, and it's not going to make a noticeable difference in mine at all. And I told him about a book that I had read when I was in graduate school. I have a senior moment. I forget the names of the authors. One of them was a psychoanalyst, and the other one was a social worker who was in the practice of the psychoanalyst doing, I don't know what, doing family therapy, I think, because analysts didn't do family therapy. And they had received a contract. They had put in for and received a contract from the city of Detroit. And the contract was to work with delinquent gang members in Detroit, adolescent gang members who had been convicted of crimes and were now on parole from the youth authority, or parole and probation after having served a period of time incarcerated in the youth authority. And the charge for them was to see if engaging them in talking therapy was possible. And if it was, could it make any difference in the recidivism rate? Because that's a population that has a terrible recidivism rate. Once one has been incarcerated in the youth authority in California, the likelihood that they'll spend a lifetime in the penal system of the state of California is over 40%. It's really a very high number. So the city of Detroit was trying to cut down on the number of times it had to incarcerate teenagers, and it wanted to see if talk therapy would help. So the psychoanalyst and the social worker started the work, and they discovered how much the probation officers were leaning on the guys to show up for the sessions. That this was going to be a part of how their probation was being evaluated. So they would come in because they knew that if they wanted to get off probation, they better show up and be there. But they were sullen. They didn't talk about anything that matters. They would often just sit in silence and look like they were doing a fuck you. This is horseshit. Why am I here? And the attempted therapists were not having very much success. So they were creative. They decided to break out of the box that they had lived in all these years. And they decided that they would show some they didn't have videotapes back then. They had training movies. They would show some training movies of therapy sessions and what therapy session could be like to the clients to see if that would make a difference. And not if they saw people actually participating in therapy and the kinds of conversations went on, being exposed to that softened some of them. And then they tried the intervention that I was engaged in. They said, you know what? For you, having to come here is a chore and a duty you have to do. We live in a culture where people get paid for doing things that is not a hobby of theirs, and they're not doing for the enjoyment. So, tell you what, if you come here, we'll give you $1 just for showing up. Now, if you talk about things that feel to us like important things that are taking place in your life, If you talk to us about things that really matter to you, and you'll have to leave it up to our judgment to decide whether something matters to you. But if you spend a significant amount of time with us talking about something that matters, we'll give you $5 for being here, not just $1. You can really earn some good spending money simply by coming here and talking about the things that are important in your life. And that seemed to have a very good effect and made a great difference. And the recidivism rate of the population on a long-term follow-up who had had therapy and had been paid the $5 for participating began to drop significantly from the recidivism rate of the other people who participated in the study. So I had read that damn book when I was in graduate school, and I guess it stuck with me. I was doing the same thing with him. Somebody else had the novel idea. Why don't we pay people for participating in psychotherapy? They had broken that old psychoanalytic horseshit that people have to pay a reasonable fee and suffer financially to have the motivation to get some goodness out of the encounter. I was going in just the opposite direction. I was trying to make somebody's life better. If I was in the business of trying to help people lives be better, I could do it economically as well as I could by whatever support, kindness, and wisdom I could impart. And I took him on as much to learn from the experience as to help him. Well, as I said, we never had any real trouble between the two of us. He came and he worked hard. Much as I had suspected, he was vulnerable. Wait, let me start that sentence over again. I totally understand going berserk with what used to be called combat fatigue if you're working on people's napalm bodies and the corpses of people burned to a crisp and the agonies of people running around screaming in pain because they're still on fire when you arrive, and then trying to figure out what to do about people with significant third degree burns on parts of her body. And that's what you're doing day after day after day. I can imagine losing all the rest of your resiliency and cracking up. I didn't fault him at all. And I could understand why that would happen. But from what I was learning in school and the beliefs I was imagining, I don't think how do I put it? We get vulnerable sooner and have less of a reservoir of being able to tolerate horror if we've had too many horrors already in our life of other kinds. If we had a history of having lived through horror one after another, and new horrors start, we will crack easier than if we've had a very sustaining, very supportive, very optimistic and cheerful life up until the time when horror shows up. We can take more of it and live through it without cracking longer. So I was not surprised. He had been badly treated as a child. He wasn't subject to a lot of physical abuse, but he was subjected to a lot of emotional abuse. He was told about his worthlessness. He was told about his stupidity. Ways of socializing him were to criticize him, point out his faults, and tell him that he was disgusting and impossible, that his parents were sorry that they had the burden of having to raise him. Things like that were laid on him over and over again. And he was very eager to leave home at an early age. Uh, he liked being in school. School seemed like refuge from him and for him. He hated going home at the end of the school day to his house that was such a war zone. Same kind of behavior went on between the parents as was inflicted on him. He just lived already in a war zone long before he went off to war. And he was reflecting to me that he never talked back. He never talked to his parents about how awful being their child had been. He had just simply absorbed it and tried to get away as best as possible and tried to go away to college as soon as he could. And maybe he needs to talk to his family. Maybe he needs to tell them off. Maybe he needs to deal with them. He is, at the time I started seeing him, he was unresponsive. His parents knew where he was, but They tried to call him on the phone and he would hang up on them. They would try to send him letters. There was no email back then. And he would write back, "Leave me alone." He would send back one-liners and want to have nothing to do with them. He had no siblings. Uh, as we went on, he began to, well, there were fewer and fewer episodes of his going out of control at the board and care facility. He became more patient. He became quieter. He was pouring out his hurt and his distress and his rages to me and didn't have to enact them on the streets of the city. Somebody else would listen and somebody else would care. And as the months went by, he said he was developing a plan for his future. He didn't want to be an incapacitated person for the rest of his life and simply ward and care facility. He wanted to do more. He wanted to pick up the lost pieces of the life that had gotten interrupted when he was drafted. He thought he wanted to go back to college and that he could tolerate it. He could hold himself together and study and do the schoolwork. And uh, he said there was a second thing he wanted to do. He wanted to reopen his connection to his family, wanted to talk to his father and mother. He wanted to hold them accountable for how they had wounded him and told them that they were in part responsible for the fragility with which he was living his life. He wanted their help. They could make amends by helping him to find the money to go to college now again. He'd let them make reparations to him. He'd love an apology from them. And he had this idea he would do two things. His family was from St. Louis. He would apply to a university in St. Louis, use his parents' address as his address so he could get in-state tuition, tell his parents he was coming back, and he would at least live with them temporarily, but there was work to do, and he wanted my help. Could I find a good family therapist for him and his family in the St. Louis area? Because he wanted to tell them he would reopen his connection with them, even come and live with them while he started college. But the price they had to pay was they had to go into family therapy with him. And in the presence of a neutral party, listen to him, the story of his pain. He'd be glad to hear more about what their pain was all about because he never understood it. And all of them could benefit by having a third party and have free conversations with each other in the presence of a third party. Would they allow him to do that? And he said, if this happens and the pieces fall in place, then I'll thank you for the time you spent with me and I'll go back to St. Louis and pick up my lost life and the work I really need to do with my family there. So I thought it made an eminent good sense what he was saying to me. And I would salute him and wish him on his way. And that's exactly how it turned out. He went back. I had helped him find a family therapist who was willing to start the work. He told me we stayed in touch by telephone and by snail mail some of the time after that. I didn't want to intrude on the therapy he was doing with the family therapist, though. So I knew he made a good beginning. His family had not teed off on him. His family had felt crestfallen about the fact that he had disappeared out of their life and that their irritability and their attempt to raise him with good Protestant values and the way they had been taught to raise children had hurt him. They hadn't intended to hurt him. And they were willing to have him stay as long as he was willing to be there. And dad had done well financially over the last few years. Yes, they would help him pay for his college education, and they were glad to have him back in his life, in their life. And so I said goodbye to him for the last time about a year after he started. He was getting excellent grades in college and he was majoring in psychology. No, no surprise. That was the last contact I had with him. So I will stop my story at this point and I'll do the strangeness I did last time. Let us unfreeze ourselves for a while and at least talk about this case before I go on to do something else. The floor is now open.
Now you're the maniacal assaulter whisperer too. Playing off of Scott's comment from last week.
Thank you for that one.
Arthur, this reminds me of a kind of like a story that I've told, many times in the course of the psychotherapy that I've provided, and I recall the story of Les Miserables.
Oh yes.
With
Oh yes.
with the priest who takes in Jean Valjean when he's completely destitute, and basically gives him a place to stay when he's kind of like trying to, just run away from everything.
Well, he had made a prison break. That he's on the
Yes.
lam.
Yeah, and so then, he takes I guess the riches from the priest.
Oh, it's a silver candlesticks he steals.
Right. Well, he takes some treasures from the church and the priest, and then he's caught by the gendarme, and the gendarme bring him back, and they say, kind of like, well, in some ways that he said that you gave this to him. And the priest says, well, yes, I not only did I give this to him, but he forgot to take these candelabra.
Oh yes, that's right.
And that, kind of like changed his life.
Yeah.
That moment, that experience with the priest, and some of the priest was so kindly and good to him, that then in some ways then he decided that he would change his life and do good for the world.
Yeah.
Reminded me of that.
That is, thank you. What I'm resonating to is it's something I teach when I teach. The very principle you're talking about, that the the therapeutic encounter in the room of the shrink that goes on is a really important thing. The client is not a specimen on which we do things, and it's a fellow human being in which we're having some kind of human interaction. And the relationship with the therapist, simply in its quality and its kind of respect and openness and safety, the things we try to provide, they can be life-changing itself, better than any words we might be saying or any actions we think we're taking with our clients.
But also, I think that the kindness that you bestowed upon him was life-changing.
Yeah, I believe that. I don't know any particular connections I made or wise comments I made about the meaning of his behavior. I don't know if any of that mattered at all.
Yeah, it was a truly safe harbor in a way for
Yeah.
him to kind of be
You could,
witnessed.
you could even throw a Kleenex box at me. How do we teach any of this? We're raising a generation of people following us that we try and teach to be as mechanistic as possible. You make a diagnosis and then you pick from a list of interventions that you're going to dispense, and you give a workbook on working on the intervention. Oh my God.
Well, you're teaching it right now, I think.
Yeah, case consultation and supervision still lives.
Yes. Yeah, but those of us who may be bent in the directions the three of us are talking about, are we a dying breed?
Yes.
Thank you. Now I'll go out and shoot myself.
I don't know if the breed will ever die 100%, but I doubt we'll be the definitely not the majority.
How come Arthur, your client, was dishonorably discharged? That didn't bode well for me. Why, yeah, after all he endured and kind of like the tragedy, and what was it not understandable in terms of his
I
reaction?
think that because so many soldiers were getting high and stoned, and so many soldiers were falling apart. It was like Patton slapping that soldier in World War II because he did the same thing. He was came under shell fire hour after hour after hour and just broke out, curled up in a fetal position and started crying and crying and crying. And they evacuated him to a field hospital nearby. And Patton slapped his face and told him he was a fucking coward and he needed to get up out of bed and get back into fighting. So they were trying to make it as hard as possible to drop out. And you got court-martialed and lost your benefits if you fell apart. They didn't want to permit the falling apart.
Mhm. Hmm.
We were scraping the bottom of the barrel on troops to go to Vietnam by the end of the war. Well, it didn't sit well with the government either as the months went by and they changed the policy. Uh, Anything else about this case? Nothing comes to mind? All right, let me go back to screen sharing then, and I will pick something else to go at least start. There, it's here too. Let's see, I need to put brackets around this one because I've talked about it. Okay, that's been done. Uh-huh. I like this one. Assuring a client that his condition was hopeless and that nothing could be done to help him. This one still makes me laugh. So I'll get this one started. I don't know if I'll have time to finish it today. This was not a client I saw myself. When I was still connected with the California School of Professional Psychology and still running the place as dean, I think in about the 6th year of my residency, I had reserved the right to do more than administration. I had reserved the right to pick a class each semester and teach a class because I liked being in the classroom. I didn't want to spend all my time on unpleasant, toxic, difficult, challenging, crazy making administrative challenges and decision making. So being in the classroom was always a comfort for me, and that made it possible to put up with the rest of it. So I was teaching a class I frequently taught called Intermediate Psychotherapy. Students had been out to some practicum experiences already, and they had had some beginning experience trying to be the therapist to other human beings. And this was a class that was to sharpen them up and prepare them even more fully for what the task was that they were carrying out. And it was done in the following way. In the first half of the class, I would present some conceptual material of one sort or another. And then in the second half of the class, we were open to be a group of consultants. We would staff cases. They would bring in stories of what they were encountering in various field placements, and we would go over them and try and help them to sharpen what they were doing because many of the places we sent students to, the quality supervision wasn't that good, and they could use better caretaking. And some of my graduate students that were in the class were as competent or better than the damn supervisors they had out in the field. So here we went. So one day a student came in and he was placed at that point at Kaiser Permanente Hospital on Sunset Boulevard. And he had a novel assignment that most of the other students weren't encountering. The the psychology department there had a very good reputation among the other services. The psychologists were respected and seen as very worthwhile. And often, if another service worried that there was some psychological component to some refractory physical illness that they were struggling with, they would ask for a consult. They would ask somebody from the psychology department to come over to the other service and spend some time there and look over the materials they had on the client and give some tests to the client maybe or talk to the client. So my student was picked by his supervisor. There was a man in GI distress who had kept coming back every month, every 6 weeks, saying that his gut was seizing up and the pain was unbearable. And they had tried everything. They had given him an endoscopy. They had scoped him. They had tried a variety of medications. th- they had scoped him up with an upper scoping. They just given him a colonoscopy. They could not identify any physical condition. He was very, very graphic. I can even remember the gestures he would make. He would walk in there and say, "You guys are not helping me. You don't know what it's like. I go to work and my gut goes like this. It twists and it just hurts. It's unbearable. I double up and I go to the bathroom and I try to evacuate. I can't get any shit out of myself. And it hurts and hurts. I have to go home. What can I take? What can you do? You're supposed to be helping me and you're not helping me." So my student was given the task of making some kind of evaluation. What could he identify? And he came back and presented what he had learned to his supervisor. And the supervisor was going to help him to write a report to the GI doctors, teach him how to do that, how to write a consultation report. So what he reported was this was a man with a very troubled history containing all kinds of things. He had been a barbiturate addict for a period of some years and had struggled to get off of barbiturates. He had been a cocaine addict for some years and had to struggle with cocaine addiction. He was constantly, concurrently in going to Alcoholics Anonymous and had only been clean and sober for about 3 months at the point that the student had been meeting with him. He had been through three wives. He was about 43 years old. He had been through three stormy divorces already, getting married for the first time at 19 and then twice more. He could not hold a job. He would get into fights with other personnel or with supervisors, and he would get fired. And he was currently just back at a new job and had already been written up for being insubordinate to a supervisor, and he was living with his 80-year-old mother, and they were fighting all the time too. And uh, I'm, I'm shaking my head again. If you wanted to talk about what we typically label as character problems, he had about 17 of them in spades, along with problems of addiction. He was about the least promising candidate for any kind of psychotherapy we could script. It would have to be somebody just lost in permanent hallucinations who might be a little bit worse than this guy would be as a candidate for being improved by talking to somebody. But the supervisor at Kaiser said, let's write this up that there's probably a very strong psychological component in the man's pain threshold and his reactions to what his body is doing. And it might be useful to try a course of psychotherapy for a period of time and see if it could make a difference. So the recommendation was made. The whoever had been the intake physician in the GI department met with a guy and said, "You met with a psychology intern who was here. We've all thought that it might be helpful for you to just start some kind of life review, some counseling with the psychology student, and it might be helpful. I know you don't see the connection, but it might start reducing your intestinal pain." And the guy was angry. He said, "That's not going to do a fucking thing for me." But he was told to do that if he wanted to be a usefully enrolled Kaiser member. This was the recommendation for what the care was that he needed. He should follow out the recommendation and try it. He had nothing to lose except time trying it. So he started to see my student on a weekly basis. He was sullen. Mainly, he went to question the utility of why he was there. He would describe his pain and say, "So what are you going to do about it? You're not doing anything for it. It's not. I come here and I talk and I tell you what my pain is like and when the pain hits me and what I go through, and I don't feel any better. This is doing nothing for me." And the student felt frustrated, and the supervisor was a good Rogerian. To just keep reflecting back to him. You're not. You say that you're not getting much benefit out of coming here. Tell him things like that. Just keep reflecting back his feeling states, and you're frustrated. I can tell how frustrated you are. Just keep doing that over and over again. I started to think of that wonderful saying: "If the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail." So my poor student was doing that with the guy, and he was getting nowhere. The guy was getting angrier and angrier. He thought he was going to get assaulted eventually. On several occasions, the patient had stormed out and discussed, I'm not going to stay here anymore today. Oh, and during the course of time they were working together, the guy got fired from his job again and was without work. It was dependent solely on his mother's feeding him and keeping the roof over his head. And she was fed up with him. She kept telling him he was a loser and when was he going to get his life together and on and on. So my student said, "What can I do with this guy?" I said, "I don't know. Let me come up with something." I just trusted myself. I waited. I tried to pay attention to what I would give birth to. And what I gave birth to was, I said, invite him to come to this class. What? Yeah, invite him to come to this class. Tell him he feels nobody's paying proper attention to him and nobody understands. Tell him this is like doing grand rounds. He can come to class, get permission from Kaiser that you can invite him to come to class, see if they'll let you do that, and we'll listen to him. And he will be in the presence of 15 people who will try to care about him and try to be helpful. We'll listen to him. We'll try suggesting some things to him. We'll see where that goes. We'll see if we can start anything that might be helpful for him. And 15 people will put out their best effort to be of some help to him. We're not going to take him for granted and just gloss over whatever's happening. So much to my surprise, I thought I was going to be off the hook because the setting was never going to agree to allow the student to see their Kaiser patient in a classroom with his classmates. But much to my surprise, they said, if that's what you're recommending, go ahead and see what happens. So in he comes with the patient at one point. I'll call him patient because that's what they called him at Kaiser. And he sits down and he looked a little bit troubled. He saw all these expectant faces. And I shared with him, just like I did with the guy who came from the VA. I said, here's what the kinds of things we've heard about you so far. These seem to be significant difficulties and challenges in your life. Uh, am I understanding this? Yes. Have I missed anything? Well, there were a few more things he added that were troublesome about his existence. He had one of his former wives was harassing him and trying to get money from him all the time. So he added that to the list of stressors, and we listened. And when he was finished, I said, "All right, the floor is open. Any of you can say anything or ask any questions you might." And a back and forth started between him and my students. And I just waited to see where it would lead. And he was full of the game that Eric Byrne called Yes But. One of my students would suggest, Have you tried deep breathing when you're feeling troubled? Yes, I've tried that, and I'll tell you what happens when I do that. He was filled with, there was nothing that was being suggested that somebody else hadn't suggested to him, and that he tried, but it wasn't working. Whatever was being suggested, he had already tried, and it was doing no good for him. So I listened to the yes butting for about 30 minutes, and everybody was feeling frustrated and annoyed. He was frustrated and annoyed, and I decided I better take over. So I did. I said, all right, I'm supposed to have some superior wisdom because I've been around more, and I've listened to more and read more and written more, and I supervise more. And so I'll try and give you some added value. Let me confess something. I don't think any of us, either your GI doctors or any mental health professionals you've seen, have had the courage to tell you the truth. And I think it falls to me. That's one of the things we need to do occasionally. We need to be truth sayers, even if the truth is very painful and causes a lot of trouble. So I'm going to tell you the truth about your current circumstances. They are hopeless. You have been damaged beyond repair. There's nothing the GI doctors know. There's nothing that psychotherapists know that can make one bit of difference for you. You're going to live in terrible misery for the rest of your life. And I wish I could say more, but that's the truth. Uh, I think all of us should just stop pretending that we have something helpful to provide for you because we do not. And I'll recommend over at Kaiser that they tell you the truth, that there's nothing they can do for you. They've exhausted every possibility they can think of. If you're fortunate, maybe someday something will be invented that might help you, but certainly there's nothing available either in physical medicine or in psychological medicine that can do a damn bit of difference for you at the present time. And he said, well, what am I supposed to do with yourself? I said, I don't know what you're supposed to do with yourself other than maybe try and live in misery and tolerate it better. But there's certainly something you could do for us. So what do you mean I could do something for you? He said, we don't get a chance to spend enough time with hopeless people. Would you do something that might make a difference? It's not gonna make a difference for you, but it could make a difference someday. Would you just, it's December now. My student is gonna be there at Kaiser Permanente until next June, end of June. Could you see my student for once a week and just show up and answer any of his questions and talk about anything that's on your mind? Let him get to know you. Maybe if enough hopeless people keep showing up and we get to listen to them over a really extended period of time and watch how they respond to changing circumstances in their life or new challenges that are appearing or simply getting older, if we learn from observing them, if you just let us observe you, maybe we'll begin to formulate different ways of working with you that might be better. Maybe we will find some ways to benefit you. You could make a contribution to the future. You probably can't make any contribution to your present, but you can make a contribution to the future of life on the planet. That other people who are afflicted like you maybe have a way out when when you have not been given any. That would certainly be something I would appreciate a lot. So he said, well, I got a lot of free time right now. I don't see why I couldn't do that. And he agreed to do it, much to my surprise. So my student and he met once a week, every week with no agenda, no attempt to make anything better. Just for my student to be present and to hear and to thoughtfully respond in whatever way he could. By the end of the school year, the man's GI distress had diminished markedly. He was not calling up and buying Pepto-Bismol or asking was there any new drug or taking painkillers nearly as much as he had. He finally had a human relationship where nothing was being expected of him, where he could live his life and just simply be himself, and not be told to be different and not be punished for who he was, and to have an unconditional acceptance he probably should have had when he was an infant and never got, and it began to make a difference. So I'll end that story too on that note, and we're open for a few more minutes before I say goodbye today. You can unmute yourselves.
Arthur, how did you come up with the hopeless solution?
I don't know if I came up with it. I was just feeling hopeless. Everybody was feeling hopeless. So I decided, well, let's just be hopeless and see where that gets us. Trying to put this, to me, it seemed like I had a mental image. There was a door that was marked pull. But if you kept pulling it, you couldn't pull it. You couldn't pull it. The secret was that door had to be pushed rather than pulled. And if you would push, maybe it would open. So that's kind of the thinking I was doing.
Yeah, it reminds me of, was it Albert Ellis with rational emotive therapy?
Yes.
Kind of that, accepting what is,
Yes.
yeah, as a theme I find that in a lot of my cases, that just that simple idea of just accepting and acknowledging what is, and then, moving from there.
For a moment there, I thought that was also part of your intuition, that you thought in some ways if
Yeah,
you
what?
told them that was hopeless, then he would respond differently.
Yeah. Yeah, because he was used to defeating everybody. If I told him I didn't want anything from him and he did, there was nothing he needed to do, how was he going to defeat me? Oh, I remember an interchange we had after I told him he was hopeless. He said, "You're supposed to help me." I said, "I know that. I'm supposed to help you, but I'm helpless. I can't do it." He said, "Well, I want you to try to help me." I said, "No, no. You're like a guy who's in the Pacific up to your chest there. The waves are breaking and you're yelling, 'Help, help, I'm drowning.' And you know what would happen if I went anywhere near you and tried to help you? You'd climb up on my back and push me under the water. I don't want to do that. There are no sharks in the water. Nobody's attacking you. So I'm not going to do that. You can't defeat me because I don't need you to do anything." I did say those words to him. The prime principle of his life was to prove that nobody else was going to make him do anything. Ah, who invented the human organism? We deserve to become extinct.
Well, don't worry about that.
All right, I'll say goodbye to you for this afternoon, and we will be back together next Friday.
Okay.
Bye, guys.
All
Good
right.
seeing you.
Bye-bye.